Hello, I'm Mr. Bird, and I'm going to be reading a couple of scary stories to you with a twist. You see, one of the two stories that I'm going to read to you is a true story. It's based on true events, and the other one is a work of fiction. Most of what you will be hearing today comes from the scariest stories you've ever heard. Here is part 1, part 2, part 3. It's a 3-book series. It was written in the late 80s, early 90s, and really interesting stories. A lot of them are inspired from true events, mythology, folklore, different parts of history. So the first story is called The Nap. It was a warm summer evening, and Joe's wife and daughters decided to have a slumber party at a friend's house. His daughters eagerly waited by the front door with their travel bags packed full of toys. They paced back and forth impatiently, ready to begin their girls' night. Marie, Joe's wife, grabbed her belongings and made her way out. Their daughters squealed with joy and followed close behind. Joe walked them out and embraced his daughters tightly, kissing each one of them on their cheek. He gave his wife one last hug, and they departed. Once their SUV rounded the corner and was out of sight, he let out a sigh of relief. Joe could finally begin Guy's night, which was going to consist of himself, his couch, a few unhealthy snacks, and whatever he could find on television. He walked back into his home and locked the door. Trixie, his elderly chihuahua, sat lazily in her bed and hardly acknowledged his presence as he stood there debating whether he should change into pajamas or plop down on the couch and start watching TV. The allure of the television was too strong. He decided to pop open a bag of chips and begin flipping through the endless channels available on cable television. After flipping back and forth between replays of last season's Super Bowl and a very questionable cartoon, Joe felt his eyelids growing heavier and heavier. Before he knew it, he slipped into a deep slumber. Only this particular nap felt different. He somehow felt aware of his surroundings. He could hear the ceiling fan's familiar hum. The commercials that played on the television sounded so clear. So did the sound of someone or something leaning on the leather couch. He could hear the familiar squeak of the leather, and he thought to himself, maybe the girls came home and they're trying not to wake me up. He could feel them getting closer and closer to his face, but he couldn't wake up. Joe couldn't snap out of his deep sleep. Suddenly, he felt a strong whoosh in his ear. Joe bolted upright and backed away from the couch, looking toward the dining room and the kitchen in complete and utter shock. To his surprise, no one was there. His wife wasn't home. His daughters weren't standing by the couch. No one. He was home alone. Fortunately, one of his friends was up late that night, and Joe decided to give him a call. They spent the entire evening chatting about sports and pro wrestling, but Joe refused to return to his home until sunrise. When he arrived, he waited inside of his car for his wife and daughters to arrive. They walked into the home, oblivious to what Joe had experienced the night before. Story number 2 is from Scariest Stories You've Ever Heard, book number 2. And this one is called The Doctor's Visitor. A cold wind blew dead leaves past his office window as Dr. Watkins looked out at the darkening October sky. We're in for a pretty wild storm, he thought. The doctor heard the bell ringing in the church tower across the street. It was 10. It's late, he thought. I'm glad I'll be home soon. He watched the moon rise through the bare branches of the old oak tree. Something about the cold whiteness of the moon against the black sky made him shiver. Dr. Watkins had just turned back to the large stack of papers and reports on his desk when he heard a knock at the door. Who on earth would be out on a night like this, he wondered. Opening the door, the doctor was surprised to find an old woman standing there. She was so pale and thin that the doctor thought she must be very sick. Come in, he said in a kindly tone. You shouldn't be out on a night like this. And you aren't even wearing a coat, he said. Doctor, there's a sick boy who needs your help right now, the pale woman said. She thrust a folded sheet of paper into his hands. Please go to this address at once. There is no time to lose. The doctor looked at the old-fashioned piece of paper with its old-fashioned handwriting and saw that the address was a few miles out of town. He heard fat raindrops starting to splatter against the window pane. A bolt of lightning lit up the sky, followed by a clap of thunder that seemed to echo down through the streets of the village. The doctor thought of the warm fire that would be blazing at home and the cup of tea his wife would fix for him. But then he looked at the pale, thin old woman standing in his office. He saw the pleading in her strangely bright eyes. He read again the address on the musty old piece of paper she had given him. He noticed the faded flowery decorations on the edge of the paper and wondered, where would she have gotten such an old kind of writing paper? He set the piece of paper on his desk, and with a sigh, he said, I usually don't make house calls this late. Don't you think you could take the child to the clinic tomorrow morning? The woman's eyes seemed to become even brighter with a strange fire in them. I couldn't take the boy anywhere, the woman answered. And what kind of doctor are you that you will not go to a dying child? She added angrily. Dying? Why didn't you say so? What's wrong with the boy? The doctor asked as he opened the closet to get his coat and medicine bag. And how do you know he's dying? He asked. As Dr. Watkins turned to hear her answer, he noticed again how very thin the pale woman was. The white skin on her face seemed stretched so tightly that her cheekbones jutted out. Her hair was white and wispy. Her hands looked like they were made of fine china. Only her bright eyes seemed alive. They blazed with fire. Even the clothes she wore was rumpled and somehow different. Her dress looked formal and almost as if it was an old-fashioned wedding dress. You ask me how I know the boy is dying, doctor? She said in a whisper. Believe me, I know what a dying person looks like. You must hurry. There is no time to lose. I'll lock up and we'll go right away. Wait for me here. Oh, doctor, the woman said quietly, thank you for going to the boy. Thank you. I'm a doctor, and doctors go to sick people. The woman had a strange little half smile on her pale face, and she said, yes, doctors go to sick people. Something in her tone and strange half smile made him feel uneasy. Please wait right here, he said. He hurried down the hall. You can ride over with... He started to say that, and then he walked back into the waiting room and noticed that the room was empty. He called out to her and said, I'm ready to leave now, but only silence answered. He searched all the rooms in his office, but the pale woman was not here. Had he dreamed the whole visit? Maybe he had been working too hard lately. Here he was, still at the office at 10 o'clock at night, and the woman did seem a little strange. But he saw the handwritten notes, and below it, it said, doctors go to sick people. So he hadn't dreamed it. The old woman had been there. Well, the doctor said out loud, I guess I better get out of here. He turned out the lights and noticed once again the strange musty smell of the woman's clothes. A bolt of lightning lit up the sky once again as he closed the doors to his office. He pulled his coat tightly around him and walked to his car. He drove through the worsening storm. The thunder and lightning seemed to explode every few seconds, and the rain smacked against his windshield. It took him 15 minutes to reach the house, an old farmhouse off by itself on the edge of the woods. He looked at the old woman's note to check the address. When he saw it was the right house, he folded up the note and put it back in his pocket. When he knocked on the big front door, the doctor was greeted by a man in his 30s. May I help you? I'm Dr. Watkins. I'm here for the sick child. The man looked at the doctor's medical bag and said, what sick child? Our son Timothy is upstairs asleep. He's not sick. I don't understand. Who is it, Jack? His wife asked. It's a doctor. He says he's here about a sick child. Look, I was told by an old woman to come here to this address because a boy was dying. May I come in? I'm getting soaked standing here. Yes, of course, the young woman said. Come in, and what's going on? Sitting in the living room, the doctor told him about the strange, pale visitor. The old woman insisted that I come immediately. She kept saying that there's no time to lose. Now I get here and I find that nobody is... Here, the doctor suddenly stopped talking. His eyes fell on a framed photograph on a desk in the corner of the living room. That woman there in the photograph, he said, pointing towards the desk, that's her. That's the woman who was in my office. The couple looked at each other for a moment. Then the woman said, you must be mistaken, doctor. That's my mother. She's been dead for over 3 years. But she gave me this address, he said, handing her the folded up piece of paper. The young woman opened the old piece of paper, looking at her husband. When she saw what was written on it, she gasped. It can't be. It can't be true, she said. What is it? Both men cried. It's a page from my mother's prayer book. I put it in her coffin right before she was buried. The woman looked and said that in a hoarse whisper. Then she looked up towards her son's bedroom with wild eyes. She must know, she screamed. Mother knows. The woman flew up the stairs with a note in her hands, the men right behind her. They found Timothy unconscious on his bed. Dr. Watkins felt the boy's forehead and announced, "He's burning up with a fever. It might be meningitis. Call an ambulance immediately. If we get him to the hospital right away, we can save him." The young woman had collapsed on her son's bed. Dr. Watkins took the note from her and handed it to Jack. "But what does it mean? Why did she write, 'Doctors go to sick people'?" Dr. Watkins asked. Jack stared at the old-fashioned handwriting on the musty prayer book page. He swallowed hard and then said, "Doctor, my wife's mother, she died right here in this room. She died of a heart attack. We called the doctor. We waited for almost 5 hours. By the time he got here, she died." So which one do you think was a true story? The nap or the doctor's visitor? The answer is the nap. It's actually an experience that I went through several years ago, and I decided to turn it into a short story to share with you guys today. Hope you enjoyed them. Have a great day.